Hi, my name is Lila. I'm 22 years old and I work as a graphic designer. On the surface, my life might seem pretty normal, but there's a story I've been carrying with me, a story that still keeps me awake at night. It's about my family, the people who were supposed to love and protect me, but instead, they left me questioning everything I thought I knew about them. To really understand how everything went so wrong, I need to take you back to where it all began. I was 15 years old when my mom passed away. It was sudden, a heart attack that no one saw coming. One moment she was laughing with us at the dinner table, and the next, she was gone. Just like that, my world shattered. After my mom's death, it was just me, my dad, David, and my younger brother, Ethan, who was 12 at the time. My dad was devastated, and for a while I thought we'd all come together to support each other, but that's not what happened. Instead, my dad started to change. He became distant, cold even, and it didn't take long for me to notice that all his attention was focused on Ethan. At first I thought it was just his way of coping. Ethan was younger, and maybe Dad thought he needed more support. But as time went on, it became clear that Ethan wasn't just his priority, he was his only priority. And me? I was just there. I didn't realize it at the time, but that was the beginning of a long, painful journey that would change the way I saw my family forever. When my mom passed away, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. She was the glue that held our family together, the one who made sure everyone felt loved and cared for. Without her, everything started to fall apart. My dad, David, was completely broken. He stopped smiling, stopped talking to me unless it was absolutely necessary. But with Ethan, it was different. He poured all his energy into him, constantly asking about his day, making sure he had everything he needed. At first, I thought it was because Ethan was only 12 and still a kid. Maybe Dad thought he needed more attention because he was younger. I tried to be understanding, but it was hard not to feel invisible. The favoritism started small. Ethan got a new pair of sneakers for school, while I was told to make do with my old ones. When I asked Dad if I could join the art club at school, he said we couldn't afford the supplies. But a week later, he signed Ethan up for soccer camp, which cost way more than the art supplies I needed. I remember one Christmas vividly. Ethan got a brand new gaming console, a stack of games, and a bunch of other gifts. I got a sweater and a book. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that Christmas wasn't about the presents, but it was hard not to feel the sting of being treated like an afterthought. The worst part was that Ethan didn't even seem to notice. He was just a kid, happy to have his dad's attention. And honestly, I didn't blame him. It wasn't his fault. But it hurt. It hurt to see my dad, the man who was supposed to love me unconditionally, act like I didn't matter. I started to pull away. I spent more time in my room, drawing and working on school projects. Art became my escape, the one thing that made me feel like I had control over something in my life. I told myself that if I could just get through high school, I'd leave for college and finally be free of the constant reminder that I wasn't enough for my dad. But I had no idea that things were about to get so much worse. By the time I turned 18, I had learned to live with the fact that I wasn't my dad's priority. I had graduated high school with good grades, earned a partial scholarship to a local college, and even started working part-time to cover the rest of my expenses. I was proud of myself, even if no one else seemed to notice. Ethan, on the other hand, was thriving. He had become a star soccer player at his high school, and my dad couldn't have been prouder. He went to every game, cheered the loudest from the stands, and even threw Ethan a huge party when his team won the regional championship. I didn't mind, though. By then, I had accepted my place in the family. Ethan was the golden child, and I was just there. But then, everything changed. It started with Ethan complaining about feeling tired all the time. At first, we thought it was just because of his busy schedule. School, soccer practice, and games. But then he started losing weight, and his energy levels dropped even more. My dad took him to the doctor, thinking it was something minor. maybe a vitamin deficiency or stress. The diagnosis hit us like a freight train. Ethan had a rare genetic liver condition that had gone undetected for years. His liver was failing, and the doctors said he would need a transplant to survive. I remember sitting in the hospital waiting room, my dad pacing back and forth while the doctor explained the situation. Ethan's condition was serious, and time was running out. My dad was devastated. I could see the fear in his eyes, the desperation. He kept saying, "We'll do whatever it takes, we'll save him." And I believed him. I believed that he would move heaven and earth to make sure Ethan got the help he needed. But then he turned to me. "Lila," he said, his voice trembling. "You're his sister. You can save him." At first, I didn't understand what he meant. Then it hit me. He was asking me to donate part of my liver to Ethan. I didn't know what to say. Of course I wanted to help my brother. I loved Ethan, despite everything. But the idea of surgery, of giving up a part of myself, terrified me. I needed time to think, to process everything. "Dad," I said carefully, "I need to talk to the doctors, to understand the risks. I need to think about this." His face hardened instantly. "Think about it? What's there to think about? Your brother is dying, Lila. You're his only chance." I tried to explain that I wasn't saying no, that I just needed time, but he wouldn't listen. He started yelling, calling me selfish, accusing me of not caring about Ethan. His words cut deep, but I didn't know how to make him understand. I wasn't saying no. I just needed time. That night, I sat in my room staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. I felt trapped, like no matter what choice I made, I would lose. If I said yes, I'd be risking my own health. If I said no, I'd lose my dad's love. What little of it I had left, and maybe even Ethan's too. I didn't sleep at all that night, and the next morning I made a decision. I would get tested to see if I was a match, not because my dad was pressuring me, but because I needed to know if I could help Ethan. But I had no idea that the test results would reveal a truth that would shatter my world, even more than it already had. A few days later, I went to the hospital for the tests. The doctors explained the process, took my blood, and told me they'd contact me with the results. I was nervous, but I kept telling myself that I was doing the right thing. If I could help Ethan, I would. He was my brother after all. When the results came back, I was called into the hospital for a meeting with the doctor. My dad came with me, looking anxious but hopeful. I remember sitting in the small, sterile office, my heart pounding as the doctor walked in with a folder in his hands. "Layla," he began, "we've reviewed your test results, and unfortunately, you're not a suitable match for Ethan." I felt a wave of relief and guilt wash over me at the same time. I wasn't a match, which meant I wouldn't have to go through the surgery, but it also meant I couldn't help Ethan. I glanced at my dad, expecting him to be disappointed, but his expression was more than that. It was confusion. "You mean she's not a match?" my dad asked, his voice sharp. "She's his sister. She has to be a match." The doctor hesitated, looking uncomfortable. Actually, that's not necessarily true. Siblings don't always share the same genetic markers. In this case, Lila and Ethan don't have enough in common to make her a viable donor." My dad's face turned pale. "That doesn't make any sense," he muttered. "They're siblings. They have the same parents." The doctor paused, then said something that made my stomach drop. "Well, based on the results, it appears that Lila and Ethan don't share the same father." The room went silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint hum of the air conditioning. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to say something, to deny it, to explain. But he just sat there, staring at the doctor like he'd been struck by lightning. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what is he talking about?" He didn't answer. He just buried his face in his hands, shaking his head. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Shame, maybe? Or regret? It's true, he said quietly. Ethan isn't your full brother. He's my son, but he has a different mother. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My mind was racing, trying to process what he had just said. Ethan wasn't my full brother? My dad had another child with someone else? How long had he been hiding this from me? From us? Well, didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice trembling. Why didn't Mom tell me? Your mother knew, he said, his voice breaking. She found out after Ethan was born. She forgave me, Lila. She wanted to keep the family together. She didn't want you to grow up in a broken home. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom, the woman I had idolized, had kept this secret from me my entire life. And my dad, he had been living a lie, pretending that we were a normal family, all while knowing the truth. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. So what? I said, my voice rising. You've been treating Ethan like he's the only one who matters because you feel guilty? Is that it? Lila, it's not like that, he said, but I didn't want to hear it. I grabbed my bag and stormed out of the office, tears streaming down my face. I didn't even wait for my dad to follow me. I just needed to get out of there, to breathe, to think. When I got home, I locked myself in my room and cried for hours. I felt betrayed, not just by my dad, but by my mom too. They had both lied to me, kept this huge secret from me, and now I was supposed to just accept it, pretend like everything was fine. But the worst part was that I didn't know how to feel about Ethan. He was still my brother, at least in my heart, but now I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that we weren't really siblings. Did he know? Had he been keeping this from me too? I didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. My family wasn't what I thought it was, and I wasn't sure if I could ever look at my dad the same way again. The days after the revelation were some of the hardest of my life. I avoided my dad as much as possible, and when I did see him, I couldn't even look him in the eye. I felt like I didn't know him anymore. The man who had raised me, who I had spent my entire life trying to please, had been lying to me all along. Ethan, on the other hand, was completely in the dark. He didn't know about the test results or the truth about our family. My dad hadn't told him, and I didn't have the heart to. How could I? He was already dealing with so much. His health, the uncertainty of finding a donor, dropping this bombshell on him felt cruel. But my dad? He didn't seem to care about how I was feeling. All he cared about was Ethan. Every conversation we had turned into him pressuring me to do more for my brother. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen. Lila, he said, his tone sharp, I don't understand why you're acting like this. Ethan needs you. You should be doing everything you can to help him. I slammed the fridge door shut and turned to face him. What do you want me to do, Dad? I already got tested and I'm not a match. What else can I possibly do? You could at least try to be supportive, he snapped. You've been sulking around the house like a child. This isn't about you, Lila. It's about Ethan. He's fighting for his life and you're acting like a victim. His words hit me like a slap in the face. A victim? I said, my voice rising. You're the one who lied to me my entire life. You're the one who treated me like I didn't matter because you were too busy feeling guilty about your mistakes. And now you expect me to just forget all of that and pretend like everything's fine? I did what I had to do to keep this family together, he said, his voice cold. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you're not as mature as I thought you were. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was blaming me, as if I was the one who had caused all of this. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let him see me cry. You know what, Dad? I said, my voice shaking. I'm done. I'm done trying to be the daughter you want me to be. I'm done trying to earn your love. If Ethan is all you care about, then fine, but don't expect me to stick around and watch you tear me down just because I'm not good enough for you." I stormed out of the kitchen and went straight to my room. I started packing a bag, throwing clothes and essentials into a suitcase. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there anymore. Before I left, I sent a text to my Aunt Clara, my mom's sister. She had always been kind to me, always made me feel like I mattered, even when my dad didn't. I told her everything. About Ethan's condition, the test results, the truth about our family. She called me immediately and told me to come stay with her. When I walked out of the house with my suitcase, my dad didn't even try to stop me. He just stood there in the living room, staring at me with a look I couldn't quite place. Was it anger? Regret? I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. I spent the next few weeks at Aunt Clara's house, trying to piece my life back together. She was the one who told me the full story about my parents. Apparently, my mom had found out about my dad's affair when Ethan was just a baby. She had been devastated, but she chose to stay for my sake. She didn't want me to grow up in a broken home, so she forgave my dad and raised Ethan as if he were her own. Hearing that broke my heart all over again. My mom had sacrificed so much for our family, and now it felt like all of it had been for nothing. My dad had thrown it all away with his lies and his favoritism. But even as I tried to move on, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. He was still my brother, no matter what the DNA tests said, and as much as I hated my dad, I didn't want Ethan to suffer because of his mistakes. Living with Aunt Clara gave me the space I needed to breathe and think clearly. She was a rock for me during those weeks, always listening without judgment and reminding me that I wasn't alone. But even with her support, I couldn't stop worrying about Ethan. He was still my brother, and no matter how angry I was at my dad, I didn't want Ethan to suffer. One afternoon, while I was helping Aunt Claire in the kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my dad. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I even wanted to hear from him. But curiosity got the better of me. The message was short. "Ethan's condition is getting worse. They're putting him on the urgent transplant list. Please come home." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. I knew this was coming, but seeing it in writing made it feel so much more real. Ethan didn't have much time left, and the chances of finding a donor in time were slim. I showed the message to Aunt Clara, and she gave me a sympathetic look. "You don't have to go back if you're not ready," she said gently. "But if you want to see Ethan, I'll support you." I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to stay away, to protect myself from the pain and the toxic environment my dad had created. But another part of me, the part that still loved Ethan, knew I couldn't just abandon him. He didn't deserve that. The next day, I went back to the house. Walking through the front door felt strange, like I was stepping into a place that no longer felt like home. My dad was in the living room, pacing back and forth. When he saw me, he stopped, his face a mix of relief and guilt. "Leila," he said, his voice soft. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not here for you," I said bluntly. "I'm here for Ethan." He nodded, looking down at the floor. "I understand." I went upstairs to Ethan's room, where he was lying in bed, looking pale and tired. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Leila," he said weakly, "I didn't think you'd come." I sat down next to him, trying to hold back tears. "Of course I came," I said, forcing a smile. "You're my brother." We talked for a while, avoiding the heavy topics and just focusing on the little things. His favorite shows, the books he'd been reading, the funny memories we shared from when we were kids. For a moment, it felt like everything was normal again, like we were just two siblings hanging out. But the reality of the situation was always there, looming over us. Ethan was running out of time, and there was nothing I could do to save him. I felt helpless, and it was the worst feeling in the world. A few days later, we got the call. A donor had been found, a young man who had passed away in a car accident. His liver was a match for Ethan. I couldn't believe it. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, there was finally a glimmer of hope. Ethan was rushed to the hospital for the transplant, and the surgery went smoothly. When the doctors came out to tell us he was stable, I felt like I could finally breathe again. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel relief. The days following Ethan's surgery were a blur of emotions: relief, exhaustion, and a strange sense of hope all mixed together. I spent most of my time at the hospital, sitting by Ethan's bedside as he recovered. He was still weak, but the doctors were optimistic. They said the transplant had gone well, and with time, he would regain his strength. Ethan was grateful, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly connecting. He didn't know about the test results or the truth about our family, and I decided not to tell him. It wasn't the right time, and honestly, I didn't want to burden him with something so heavy while he was still recovering. One afternoon, as I sat by his bed, Ethan looked at me with a serious expression. "Lila," he said, his voice still soft but steady, "I know things haven't always been fair between us. I know Dad treats me differently, and I've always felt bad about it. But I want you to know that I've never taken you for granted. You've always been there for me, even when I didn't deserve it." His words caught me off guard. I felt a lump in my throat as I tried to hold back tears. "Ethan, you don't have to say that," I said, my voice trembling. "You've been through so much. None of this is your fault." "But it's not fair to you," he insisted. "You've always been the strong one, and I've always been the one who needed saving. I want you to know that I see you, Lila. I see everything you've done for me, and I'm so grateful." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "You're my brother, Ethan," I said. "No matter what, I'll always be here for you." In that moment, I realized that no matter what the DNA tests said, Ethan would always be my brother. Blood didn't matter. What mattered was the bond we shared, the love we had for each other, and that was something no one could take away from us. But while things with Ethan were improving, my relationship with my dad was still strained. He tried to talk to me a few times, but I wasn't ready to forgive him. Every time I looked at him, I was reminded of the lies, the favoritism, and the way he had made me feel like I didn't matter. One evening, as I was leaving the hospital, he stopped me in the hallway. "Lila," he said, his voice hesitant, "can we talk?" I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. "What do you want, Dad?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to say I'm sorry. For everything. For the way I treated you, for the lies, for making you feel like you weren't important. I know I've failed you as a father, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." His words caught me off guard. For so long I had been waiting for him to acknowledge the pain he had caused me, but now that he was finally saying it, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to let go of the anger and move forward, but another part of me wasn't ready. The wounds were still too fresh. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully, "but it's going to take time, Dad. You hurt me, and I can't just forget that." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I understand. I just hope that one day we can fix this." I didn't say anything else. I just walked away, feeling a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better someday. Ethan's recovery was slow but steady. Over the next few weeks, he started to regain his strength, and the color returned to his face. Seeing him smile again felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could see a future where he was healthy and happy. During this time, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of my dad's mistakes. I needed to take control of my own life, to focus on myself for once. So I started looking for jobs in a new city. I wanted a fresh start, somewhere far away from the house that had become a constant reminder of all the pain and betrayal I had endured. When I told Ethan about my plans, he was surprisingly supportive. "You deserve this, Lila," he said. "You've spent so much of your life taking care of everyone else. It's time for you to take care of yourself." His words meant everything to me. For so long I had felt like I was invisible, like no one saw the sacrifices I had made. But Ethan saw me, he understood, and that was enough. The day I packed up my things and left for my new apartment was bittersweet. Aunt Clara hugged me tightly, telling me how proud she was of me. Ethan, still recovering but strong enough to stand, gave me a hug and promised to visit as soon as he was able. My dad, well, he didn't say much. He just stood in the doorway, watching as I loaded the last of my bags into the car. "Lila," he said quietly, just as I was about to leave, "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope that he could change, but another part of me wasn't ready to let go of the hurt. So I just nodded and said, "Take care of Ethan." As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, relief, and a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I was putting myself first, and it felt good. In my new city, I started building a life for myself. I found a job at a design firm, made new friends, and even started going to therapy to work through everything I had been through. It wasn't easy, but every day I felt a little stronger, a little more like myself. Ethan and I stayed in touch, texting and calling regularly. He was doing well, and knowing that he was okay made it easier for me to move forward. As for my dad, we didn't talk much, but I wasn't ready to close that door completely. Maybe one day we could rebuild our relationship, but for now, I was focused on healing and finding my own happiness. Because if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, respect, and the people who stand by you when it matters most. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally learning how to stand on my own.